Is this Tycho, Alex?
I may only be 11, but I know how many people it takes to make a good date.
Alright, what are we gonna do? I don't know.
Do you ever think about those familiar child stars, the ones who were everywhere, until suddenly they weren't? These young faces filled your afternoons, your sleepovers, your Saturday mornings, shaping the way you saw the world without you even realizing it. So how did they disappear so quietly? There was a time when just one voice could hijack the entire living room, and that voice belonged to Steve Urkel. He wore suspenders, talked through his nose, and turned a side character into a sitcom juggernaut. Family Matters was supposed to be about the Winslow family. Then Jaleel White showed up, walked through that front door, and never left. Did I Do That? Became a national anthem of chaos. And for kids watching in the 90s, Jaleel was more than just a punchline. He was the awkward, brilliant, over-the-top genius who somehow made being weird feel cool. He turned accidents into adventures, nerdiness into power. And every time he pulled out a new invention or walked in wearing that lab coat, we knew something wild was about to happen. What most people forget is just how young Jaleel White was when all of this started. He was a teenager carrying an entire sitcom, doing physical comedy, running through fake walls, and wearing prosthetic teeth, all while still trying to be a kid. The pressure was huge, but the performance? Unstoppable. As the show went on, things got even weirder. There was Stefan Urkel, there were teleportation pads, there was that episode where he cloned himself into a cooler version just to win over Laura. At one point, he literally turned into Bruce Lee. But even through the strangeness, Jaleel stayed sharp, always knowing how to wring a laugh out of every stumble, every pause, every perfectly timed, "Whoa, mama!" And then it stopped. When Family Matters ended, Jaleel disappeared from the spotlight almost as quickly as he had entered it. He was typecast, trapped by those suspenders and oversized glasses. For years, he tried to prove he was more than Urkel, but Hollywood was not ready to see him any other way. Still, he never really left. He popped up in guest spots. He voiced Sonic the Hedgehog. And for those who paid attention, he quietly built a second career, less flashy, more grounded, and free from the shadow of a character he had long since outgrown. But for 90s kids, Jaleel White will always be that one-of-a-kind presence, part cartoon, part genius, part hurricane. He made us laugh. He made us cringe. He made nerd a household word. And once he walked into that living room, we never looked at sitcoms the same way again. If you grew up in the late 80s or early 90s, chances are your first heartbreak had a name, and it was Winnie Cooper. She was sweet, smart, just out of reach. Danica McKellar played her with a softness that felt real. On the Wonder Years, every glance, every pause, every "Hi, Kevin" could make your stomach drop. And that is what made her unforgettable. Because Winnie was not a fantasy, she was familiar. The girl across the street, the one who sat 2 rows ahead, the one who made you freeze when she smiled. Danica brought that innocence and ache to life in a way that hit home for anyone trying to make sense of growing up. She was only in her early teens when the show began, but Danica carried a kind of emotional weight that was far beyond her years. Winnie Cooper was not just Kevin Arnold's love interest. She was our benchmark for how confusing and beautiful young love could be. And when she cried, we cried too. But here is what most people missed. Danica McKellar was never just an actress. After the Wonder Years ended, she went quiet on the screen and loud in the classroom. She studied mathematics. She wrote best-selling books to help girls get into STEM. She even has a math theorem named after her. That is right. While the rest of us were rewatching those old episodes and getting nostalgic, she was literally rewriting the equation on what it means to be a former child star. She proved that Hollywood could be one chapter, not the whole book. She chose to lead, not just be remembered, and she did it her way. In recent years, Danica has popped back into the spotlight, doing Hallmark movies, writing more books, and reminding people that yes, she is still Winnie, but she is also so much more. She is the rare case of a child star who never seemed lost. She just evolved. And for the rest of us, Winnie Cooper will always be a name that brings back memories, not just of what we watched, but of what we felt. She was the first crush we rooted for, the last scene we never wanted to end. And when the screen faded to black, we were not ready to let her go. He was the kid with the gadgets, the sidekick with the fastest reflexes and the loudest lines. Before we even learned his real name, we knew him as Short Round, and he stole every scene he was in. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom gave us a lot. Action, temples, bugs, fire. But Jonathan Ke Quan gave us heart. Short Round was funny, fearless, and fiercely loyal. He drove a car before most of us learned to ride a bike. He yelled at Indiana Jones like they were equals. And when he said, "Indy, I love you," it was not a punchline. It was the truth. He was not just comic relief, he was the emotional core of an otherwise chaotic adventure. You felt safer when he was on screen, like everything might work out because Short Round was on it. He made friendship look like the strongest weapon in the movie. Then came the Goonies. Data, the genius, the inventor, the kid with the slick shoes and the punchy one-liners. If you were a child in the 80s, there was no one cooler. He was not the leader. He was not the jock. He was the brains in a trench coat full of springs and gadgets, and somehow that made him the hero we all wanted to be. But like so many 80s kids on screen, Jonathan's moment faded fast. Hollywood had few roles for Asian American actors, and fewer still for young ones growing up. So Jonathan stepped away, not because he wanted to, but because there was nowhere else to go. For years, he worked behind the scenes. He learned stunt choreography. He trained in martial arts. He stayed in the industry, even when the spotlight had moved on. And then, just when everyone had forgotten, he came back. In 2022, Jonathan Ke Quan returned to the screen in Everything Everywhere All at Once. And suddenly, the world remembered what it had missed. The timing, the charisma, the spark. He was not just back, he was better than ever. For kids who grew up quoting Short Round or pretending to be Data on the playground, seeing him again felt like finding an old friend. Someone we did not realize we missed until they walked back into our lives. Jonathan Ke Quan never stopped being brilliant. We just took too long to notice. There was always someone cooler than the popular kids, and on Saved by the Bell, that someone was Lisa Turtle. Designer clothes, quick wit, never afraid to roast Zach Morris to his face. Lark Voorhies played her like she knew exactly who she was, stylish, smart, and 2 steps ahead of everyone else in the hallway. Lisa was not just the fashionable one. She was the voice of reason, the one who called out nonsense with a raised eyebrow and a perfect one-liner. In a show full of hijinks, she brought balance. While Zach schemed and Screech stumbled, Lisa walked in like she had already seen the episode and still had time to fix her lip gloss. She gave us a version of cool that did not beg for approval. It just existed. She was the kind of character you wanted to be or be around. And in a sea of noise, her presence was always a clear, confident beat. Lark Voorhies made Lisa feel real in a world where nothing really was. The neon colors, the over-the-top plots, the locker-side dramas, it all worked better because she grounded it. Lisa was the rare black girl on a white-dominated teen sitcom who was not a stereotype. She was funny, confident, and unapologetically herself. And for a generation of kids who saw themselves in her, she mattered. After Saved by the Bell ended, Lark stuck around for the college years and the wedding movie. But then, like so many child stars, she faded from view. There were guest roles, a few indie projects, and eventually, a long, strange silence. The truth is, Lark Voorhies struggled off-screen. In interviews and headlines, you saw the distance growing between the person and the role. Public appearances became rare. Rumors swirled. For a while, she became the kind of name you only saw in tabloid sidebars. And it hurt. Because for kids who grew up with her, Lisa Turtle was unforgettable. In recent years, she has slowly re-emerged, quietly, carefully, even appearing in the Saved by the Bell reboot for a heartfelt moment that felt like something closing and opening all at once. She talked openly about her mental health, about being misunderstood, about reclaiming her voice. Lark Voorhies gave us one of the coolest characters on television, and then fought to rediscover herself when the cameras stopped rolling. And no matter how far she went from Bayside, we never stopped waiting at her locker. He was tiny. He was charming. And for a while, Emmanuel Lewis was everywhere. On lunchboxes, late-night talk shows, even in commercials with Michael Jackson. But for most of us, he was Webster, the small boy with the big heart who melted America's defenses every week on prime time. Webster was a sitcom about adoption, family, and second chances. But really, it was a showcase for Emmanuel's charisma. He was not just a child actor, he was a presence. The way he looked at people, the way he tilted his head just so, the way he always found the emotional truth of a scene. It was magic. He had a warmth that made every living room feel safer. Emmanuel could deliver a joke, then turn around and break your heart in the same scene. He was the reason people tuned in, and the reason they stayed. What people often forget is how young he was when all of this happened. Emmanuel was just 12 years old when Webster premiered, but he looked half that age. His small stature was the result of a medical condition, but the show leaned into it, framing him as the wide-eyed kid in a world of overgrown furniture and oversized problems. But Emmanuel handled it all with grace. He had timing, he had charm, and more than anything, he had a sense of who Webster was: kind, curious, and quietly strong. When Webster ended in the late 80s, so did Emmanuel's dominance in pop culture. He never completely vanished. He made appearances, did reality shows, showed up at red carpets, but the frenzy faded. And in some ways, he seemed okay with that. Because what happened to Emmanuel Lewis is something rare. He just grew up. He did not spiral. He did not headline scandals. He lived, studied, stayed grounded. He proved that you could be famous, then not be famous, and still be okay. Today, when people bring up Webster, it usually starts with, whatever happened to that kid? And the truth is, he just became a person. But for kids in the 80s, Emmanuel Lewis was more than a face on a screen. He was comfort, he was fun, he was the little guy who never let the world shrink him. And honestly, we could still use a little of that spirit now. You knew the glasses. You knew the BB gun. You knew the way he muttered, "I triple dog dare you." For kids who grew up with A Christmas Story, Peter Billingsley was Ralphie forever. And that is both the beauty and the burden of playing a holiday icon. That face became tradition. Every year, the movie played on loop. You saw Ralphie stick his tongue to a pole, wear a pink bunny suit, and fantasize about saving the day with perfect aim. And every year, Peter Billingsley got a little older, while Ralphie stayed the same. He was frozen in time, but he was never stuck. Peter understood early what many child actors struggle to learn. The magic is not in holding the spotlight, it is in learning how to use it. He studied the craft from all sides, asking questions, watching the gears turn behind the scenes. By the time most people forgot his name, he was already directing, already building a future most never saw coming. Peter was already a working actor before A Christmas Story. He had been in commercials, television shows, and small movies. But Ralphie cemented him in pop culture, adorable, earnest, and perpetually 9 years old in a winter coat too big for his body. He was all of us at Christmas, dreaming, scheming, and just trying to make it through dinner without getting soap in our mouths. After the film, Peter did not chase stardom the way others did. He appeared here and there, quiet roles, smaller parts, voice work. But behind the scenes, he was building something much bigger. He became a producer, a director, a creative force. He worked with Jon Favreau on Elf. He helped shape Iron Man. He became the guy who knew how to make other people shine because he had already been in the spotlight and knew how to hold it steady. Peter Billingsley never really left. He just moved behind the camera and helped create the kinds of stories that inspired new generations of wide-eyed kids with big dreams. And every year, when December rolls around, he comes back, quietly, warmly, right where we left him, in the snow, in the glasses, still hoping for that Red Ryder, and still reminding us what wonder looks like. She was the cool girl in your childhood movies, the one who was confident without trying, funny without forcing it, and always just a little smarter than everyone else in the room. Jenny Lewis had that look, that spark, that edge. In Troop Beverly Hills, she wore that oversized uniform like armor, rolled her eyes at ridiculous adults, and somehow made a Girl Scout troop feel like the most rebellious place on earth. Then she showed up in The Wizard, the cross-country video game road trip movie we all rented too many times. She was Haley, scrappy, sarcastic, with that perfect "are you kidding me" tone. Jenny gave the role heart. And when she shouted California, with that mix of urgency and mystery, yeah, you still remember that. She was not acting like a kid pretending to be cool. She was cool. She could roll with the weirdest plot lines and still feel grounded. Jenny had that rare energy that made you feel like she could take on the world, or at least the Nintendo world, and win. Even when the scripts were thin, her presence gave them weight. And in a sea of 80s movie kids, she stood out like she was headlining her own band. Jenny Lewis was not just another child actor. She was the one you wanted to hang out with. Her characters had attitude, but never arrogance. She was cooler than the leads, and somehow made the sidekick role feel like the star. After her early film run, Jenny slowly drifted from acting. She did guest roles on TV, popped up in a few movies, but something was shifting. She was still in entertainment, but not in front of the camera anymore. That is because Jenny Lewis found her second act, music. And not just dabbling, she became the frontwoman of Relo Kiley, one of the most beloved indie rock bands of the early 2000s. Her voice changed, deepened, grew sharp and soulful. She went from child star to singer-songwriter, crafting songs that felt like diary pages soaked in sunlight and sadness. Jenny's career became about evolution, not nostalgia. She toured, she recorded solo albums, and along the way, she proved that reinvention is not always about running from the past. It is about owning it. To this day, people still gasp when they connect the dots. Wait, Jenny Lewis was in Troop Beverly Hills? Yes, she was the one we all grew up watching, and the one still worth listening to. She is proof that some child stars do not burn out. They just change frequencies. In a house full of personalities, she was the one who never tried to compete, and that is what made her stick. As Jennifer Keaton on Family Ties, Tina Yothers was the little sister with the deadpan stare and the perfectly timed zingers. Surrounded by Michael J. Fox's Alex, the brainy middle child, and Justine Bateman's cool older sister Mallory, Jennifer could have disappeared. But Tina made sure she never did. She was the quiet one, until it was time to speak, and then she nailed it. Every shrug, every side-eye, every whatever was a perfectly delivered punchline. She balanced the show's emotional weight with blunt humor, like she had an older soul watching everything unfold. Tina made being the youngest feel like being the smartest, and she never needed to shout to be heard. Jennifer was blunt, honest, a little tomboyish, a little tough. And Tina Yothers played her with a casual confidence that felt real. She was not trying to be cute. She was just trying to survive a household of big energy, and she did it with calm sarcasm and rolled eyes. Tina was younger than her castmates, but she never felt like a side note. She held her own in scenes with Michael Gross and Meredith Baxter Birney, and she delivered punchlines like she had been doing it forever. When Family Ties ended, Tina stepped back from acting. She made a few TV movies, showed up on talk shows, and then, like so many child stars, went quiet. But she did not disappear. She transformed. Tina leaned into music, performing in a band called Jaded. She dyed her hair jet black, started wearing combat boots instead of cardigans. And while the tabloids were busy trying to label it a rebellion, what she was really doing was just growing up. She never tried to cling to the sitcom image. She let it be what it was, part of her story, not the whole thing. In the years since, Tina has popped up on reunion shows and nostalgia circuits, always with the same straightforward attitude that made Jennifer so lovable in the first place. No pretense, no polish, Just a girl who grew up in front of millions, then stepped off screen to figure out who she wanted to be. She is still out there, still funny, still sharp, and still proving that sometimes the quietest kid in the room leaves the biggest impression. If you grew up with growing pains, you knew Ben Seaver, the younger brother, the one always in trouble, always trying to scheme his way out of chores, and always chasing after something he probably should not have touched in the first place. Jeremy Miller gave him that classic sitcom energy, loud, mischievous, and just grounded enough to feel like a real kid in a very TV-perfect family. Ben was the one who made the mess, who pushed the buttons, who asked the questions no one else wanted to hear. And Jeremy's smile, half grin, half whoops, made it impossible to stay mad at him. He was not the breakout star like Kirk Cameron, but Jeremy carved out his place in the Seaver household. You waited for his scenes because they brought a little chaos, a little comedy, and that "why not" attitude every sitcom needs. After Growing Pains ended, Jeremy faded from the spotlight. He did some voice work, a few TV appearances, but the fame had already started to wear thin. He was growing up, and the world did not always know what to do with a kid once the laugh track faded. Jeremy has been honest about what happened next. He battled addiction. He struggled with the pressure of being known, then unknown. He dealt with things that most of us would not wish on anyone, and he came back from it. Slowly, quietly, but with purpose. In recent years, he has spoken out about his recovery, about mental health, about what it means to live through the spotlight and still want more from life. He does acting here and there, sure, but his real role now is advocate, survivor, someone who went through the fire and came out with something to say. Ben Seaver was fun. Jeremy Miller is something more. He is still standing, and that might be the most powerful punchline of all. Brian Bonsall, Family Ties. By the time Brian Bonsall showed up on Family Ties, the Keatons had already won over America, but they had one more story to tell. As little Andy Keaton, Brian came in as the adorable tag-along brother, born into a sitcom that was already a hit and asked to grow up fast in front of millions. He was blonde, wide-eyed, and perfectly cast. The kind of TV kid you could hand punchlines to and know he would land them. Brian brought something new to the show's final seasons. He was not just cute, he was sharp. He could throw a one-liner and steal a scene right out from under Michael J. Fox. He made Andy more than just the baby of the family. He made him real. But for Brian, Family Ties was just the beginning. After the series ended, he kept acting. Roles in Blank Check, Fatherhood, and guest spots across primetime. He was working, visible, but it did not last. Like a lot of child stars, Brian hit a wall. The roles stopped coming, the pressure piled on, and eventually, he walked away from Hollywood. What came next was rough. There were arrests, headlines, trouble that showed up the way it often does for kids who grew up too fast under the lights. But Brian did something most people never get credit for. He changed. He got sober, found music, found peace, and built something new. Today, Brian Bonsall is a touring musician. He plays guitar in punk bands, wears denim and ink instead of sitcom sweaters. He does not run from his past, but he does not live in it either. Andy Keaton grew up, and so did Brian. The story did not end when the credits rolled. It just took a detour. Cherie Johnson, Punky Brewster, Family Matters. If you were a kid in the 1980s or 1990s, you knew her face. Maybe you knew her as Cherie, the best friend on Punky Brewster, with the denim vest, the high ponytail, and the voice of reason. Or maybe you remember her as Maxine on Family Matters, bringing balance to a show filled with slapstick and chaos. Either way, Cherie Johnson made her mark. Cherie Johnson was more than a sidekick. She had presence, a quiet confidence that made her stand out in every scene. And she never tried to outshine the lead. She just made the show better. She was steady, honest, the friend you wanted to have. On Punky Brewster, she was the one who kept Punky grounded. And in a world of rainbow suspenders and cartoon logic, Cherie felt like the kid who knew what was really going on. After Punky Brewster, Cherie kept acting, but she also started writing, producing, creating. She was building a career behind the scenes long before it was trendy. And while other child stars were burning out, Cherie was carving out her own space. She wrote books, hosted shows, built a following, all without leaning on the roles that made her famous. That takes guts. That takes clarity. When the Punky Brewster reboot dropped in 2021, Cherie came back. Same character, same warmth, just older, wiser, and still steady as ever. She never lost that spark. Some child stars fade out, some flame out, and some, like Cherie Johnson, just keep going. There was Punky. There was Cherie. And then there was Margot Kramer, the rich girl with the fluffy hair, the big attitude, and the most dramatic "oh" in television history. Ami Foster turned what could have been a one-note role into a fan favorite. Margot was spoiled, sure, but Ami gave her depth and a killer sense of timing. She leaned into the character's quirks without ever making her a joke. She delivered punchlines with a raised eyebrow and perfect posture. You believed Margot wore pearls to bed, and you kind of loved her for it. Ami played her with just enough softness that you never wrote her off. She made Margot more than comic relief. She made her unforgettable. She brought flair, eye rolls, and a voice that could make the word please sound like a threat. But somehow, under all the hairspray and velvet, you saw the heart. That was Ami, always giving you more than you expected. She only did a few seasons of Punky Brewster, but that was all it took. Kids who watched remember Margot like she was in their own classroom. That one girl who was dramatic, yes, but also kind. Ami made her feel real. After Punky, Ami stepped away from the spotlight. A few roles here and there, but mostly she chose privacy, family, life outside the camera. And she never tried to reclaim that fame. She did not reboot, rebrand, or reappear on reality shows. She just lived. And maybe that is what makes her even more memorable. Because she popped into our lives with glitter and sass, and then left before the lights dimmed. Sometimes, child stars chase the glow for too long. Ami Foster danced in it, then walked away, and for a brief, perfect time, she made sitcom royalty look easy. You knew him as Theo Huxtable, that wide-smiling, slightly goofball, ever-evolving teenage son from The Cosby Show who felt so much like the older brother you wished you had. Malcolm-Jamal Warner made that role sing, whether he was fumbling through a lesson, getting schooled by his dad, or making a joke land like he had been doing it his whole life. And to be fair, he kind of had. Theo was not a side character. He was the emotional engine of the Huxtable home. Watching him grow from immature kid to young man with ambition was a rare thing for sitcoms back then. Malcolm played him with heart, never overdoing it, never trying too hard. Just natural, believable, real. By the time The Cosby Show ended in 1992, he had been on television for nearly a decade, and the world had watched him grow up in real time. But like a lot of child stars, Malcolm faced a tricky question. What next? He did not disappear. He did not implode. He just kept going. He directed episodes of shows like Malcolm and Eddie. He played recurring characters on dramas like Sons of Anarchy and The Resident. He did poetry, music, voice work. He kept building, piece by piece, even when people stopped watching, even when people stopped asking. He never chased celebrity. He just focused on the work. And in 2015, he finally got the kind of industry recognition that had long eluded him. An Emmy for his role on American Crime, The People vs. O.J. Simpson. It was not flashy, it was not loud, but it was his, and it was earned. Theo Huxtable may have grown up in front of us, but Malcolm-Jamal Warner grew up, period, gracefully, steadily, without drama, without scandal. In an industry that often eats its young, he chose something else. Peace. You may have forgotten how much you loved watching Theo learn and stumble and grow. But the guy who played him, he is still doing all that, just without the laugh track. Some child stars played roles that stuck in your memory. Kellie Martin played roles that stuck in your heart. As Becca Thatcher on Life Goes On, she gave us a teenager who was smart, flawed, curious, and deeply kind. Not some sanitized, perfect TV girl, but a real one. She dealt with love, loss, illness, and identity with a quiet honesty that made you lean closer. And she did it without ever once feeling like she was reading lines. Becca was the emotional center of that show, the one who held everything together when things fell apart. Kellie Martin made her more than just a daughter or sister. She made her a symbol of growing up when life gets complicated. And for many viewers, that performance still lives deep in the memory. After Life Goes On, Kellie kept working. In Christie, she stepped into a completely different world, Appalachia in the 1900s, playing a young schoolteacher trying to bring hope to a struggling community. It was tender, idealistic, and quietly powerful, just like her. Kellie Martin was never the loudest actor in the room, but she was always the most believable. As the years rolled on, she became a staple of TV movies, medical dramas, and murder mysteries. ER Mystery Woman, Lifetime, Hallmark. She showed up in places your mom probably loved, but you watched too, even if you would not admit it, because she brought the same sincerity to every role. She also went to Yale, earned a degree in art history, wrote a memoir, had a family, lived her life. And she never had to blow anything up on social media to do it. Kellie Martin's career is a lesson in consistency, in showing up, in being exactly who you are, even if the spotlight moves somewhere else. She may not be on magazine covers, but she is still working, still acting, still herself. You grew up watching her figure out who she was, and it turns out she figured it out just fine. Before the 1980s, before the Saturday morning cartoons and Nickelodeon, there was Dennis the Menace, and Jay North was the original troublemaker. Blonde hair, slingshot, that iconic striped shirt. He was the kid who got into everything and somehow made it all seem charming. The show aired in the early 1960s, but reruns played well into the 1980s, planting Jay's face in the memories of an entire new generation of kids. Dennis was a whirlwind of curiosity and mischief, but he was never mean, just restless. Jay North played him with an innocence that made even the most chaotic pranks feel like kid stuff, not malice. What most people never knew was how hard that role was behind the scenes. Jay was famous too fast. He was on lunchboxes and in newspapers, but he was also isolated, pushed into long filming hours, and handled by adults who saw a paycheck before they saw a person. After the show ended, he tried to keep acting, but nothing clicked. Typecasting swallowed him whole, and behind the smile was a boy who felt deeply alone. Jay North's later years were quiet, by choice. He stepped away from Hollywood, spoke openly about the pain he carried, and eventually found peace as a correctional officer and advocate for other child actors. He did not chase the camera. He turned it off. Jay North's story is not a fall. It is a release from pressure, from fame, from the expectations that come with being the kid everyone watched but no one really saw. You may have forgotten where you saw him last, but once you see that striped shirt and that grin, you remember. And maybe now you see the boy behind the mischief too. Danny Lloyd gave one of the most iconic performances in horror history, before he even knew what horror was. As little Danny Torrance in The Shining, he whispered red rum into our nightmares and stared blankly into a future he could not escape. But off camera, Danny Lloyd was not haunted. He was just a child with a quiet voice and a curious mind. And when the cameras stopped rolling, he did not chase the fame. He simply went home. He was only 6 years old when Stanley Kubrick cast him. Kubrick famously shielded him from the darker parts of the film, never letting him realize just how terrifying his role was. That protection became prophetic. Because after one more acting job, Danny Lloyd left Hollywood entirely. No talk shows, no press tours, no desperate clinging to a child role, just a vanishing act that felt almost supernatural. He became a biology professor, a husband, a father. He spent decades away from the limelight, content to live in a world where no one recognized his face. only his kindness. When he finally gave an interview years later, it was not to reclaim fame, but to reflect on how grateful he was for a normal life, one where he could grow up, finish school, and become someone beyond the boy who rode a tricycle through a haunted hotel. It is easy to forget that behind every iconic child role is a real child. And sometimes, the best twist in a horror story is that the kid made it out, safe, happy, whole. Danny Lloyd disappeared, but not because he was lost, because he was found. The big comfy couch was more than just a place for Lunette to stretch into impossible clock shapes. It was a place that felt safe, soft, and a little bit magic. It is hard to explain to anyone who did not grow up with it why a clown on a couch could be comforting, why a talking doll named Molly could feel like your best friend. But the show had a way of slowing down the world. You would turn it on, and suddenly everything felt like it was okay. Like there was time to clean up the mess, time to figure out your feelings, time to be silly without being wrong. Lunette's voice was always gentle, even when she was mad. And those little stories she acted out with Molly on the floor, they hit different. They were not just make-believe. They were metaphors, quiet little life lessons wrapped up in tea parties and feather dusters. The couch itself felt like a portal, oversized, exaggerated, and a little surreal. But that was the point. The whole set felt like it belonged to someone who understood what it felt like to be small in a world that never slowed down. You watched for the laughs, the games, the naps on the couch, but you stayed because somewhere in the chaos there was love. Real, kind, patient love. The kind you maybe did not even notice until you missed it. The big comfy couch taught kids that messes could be cleaned up, feelings could be worked through, and everyone has a space where they are allowed to just be. And when Lunette looked into the camera, you really believed she saw you. Not a demographic, not a viewer. You, the kid who needed a break, the kid who needed a laugh, the kid who just wanted someone to sit beside them on the couch and say, "Let's figure it out together." In the late 1980s, Nicole Eggert was the girl on the fridge. Not literally, but you know what I mean. Every teen magazine, every talk show, every lunchroom crush. She played Jamie Powell on Charles in Charge, and even if you did not watch the show religiously, you knew who she was. Blonde, confident, always ready with a quick line or a sarcastic look, Nicole had star power, the kind that does not wait in line. She was America's teen sweetheart for a hot minute, and then, poof, she popped up here and there afterward. A few made-for-TV movies, a recurring role on Baywatch. But the shine started to fade, and so did the offers. In a matter of years, Nicole went from center stage to somewhere on the margins, still working, but not famous. Then came the reality TV years, the ones no one really wants to talk about. Weight loss shows, tabloid headlines, personal struggles broadcast with dramatic music and commercial breaks. And that is when you realize this was not just another child star who stepped away. This was someone who tried to hang on, even when the grip hurt. Nicole later opened up about what it felt like to grow up in front of the cameras, the pressure to look a certain way, the unrelenting focus on her body. She revealed financial troubles, even took up work outside the industry. She became a single mom, started over, and did it all without the kind of comeback moment Hollywood loves to sell. She never spiraled, never made the scandal headlines people rubberneck for. Instead, she did something far less cinematic. She lived. Quietly and sometimes painfully, but truthfully. And that might be the hardest part for fans, because Nicole Eggert was a presence, a vibe, a whole aesthetic for a generation of kids figuring out what cool meant. Watching her fade out felt like watching the curtain close before the final act ever played. She is still around, still living her life. But the star from Charles in Charge? That girl everyone knew? She vanished. Not because she wanted to, but because sometimes the camera turns off before you are ready. Alex D. Linz had one of those faces that defined an era. If you were a kid in the early 2000s, you knew him. even if you did not know his name. He was the kid in Max Keeble's Big Move. He was in Home Alone 3. He was always playing the underdog, the clever kid, the one who would outsmart every adult in the room. His energy was infectious, his timing always sharp, and then, just like that, he was gone. There was no grand exit, no dramatic role that wrapped it all up. He simply stopped appearing in films, and for a child actor who had been everywhere, it was confusing. No one really expected Alex D. Linz to just vanish. As it turns out, acting had never been his long-term goal. After a few more television roles in his early teens, he quietly walked away from Hollywood. He chose school, studied hard, pursued a completely different life, and he never looked back. There was something refreshing about how low-key it was. No social media goodbye, no "Where Are They Now" tour. He just exited stage left and let the spotlight land on someone else. But for fans, especially those who watched his movies on repeat, it was bittersweet. He had been part of so many Saturday afternoons, so many sleepovers, so many moments where the only thing that mattered was whether the kid on screen would win in the end. And then, suddenly, that kid was gone. Rewatching Max Keeble's Big Move now feels strange. It is still funny, still smart. But there is a ghost of something there, a sense that we never really got to see what Alex D. Linz might have become. Or maybe we did. Maybe he knew exactly when to leave. And maybe that kind of quiet exit is its own kind of happy ending. No noise, no burnout, just a clean break from a loud business. Jaime Lynn Spears was never just a younger sibling. She was a phenomenon in her own right. At the height of Zoe 101, she was the face of Nickelodeon, confident, magnetic, and exactly the kind of girl other kids wanted to be. She had her own show, her own fan base, and for a few years, her own orbit. And then, all at once, that orbit collapsed. In 2007, Jaime Lynn was only 16 years old when the news broke. She was pregnant. It was not a rumor. It was real. The girl who played a boarding school honor student on television was about to become a teen mother in real life. And the reaction? It was not just critical. It was unforgiving. Overnight, everything changed. Nickelodeon distanced itself. The press circled like vultures. Parents' groups raged. The internet, still finding its voice back then, tore her apart. Jaime Lynn was forced to step down from Zoe 101. And just like that, the show ended. Not because the ratings were low or the writing failed, but because its star was no longer allowed to be a role model. But if you were watching closely, you could tell she never asked to be one in the first place. Jaime Lynn's early fame came fast. She had made appearances on All That, dipped into the music scene, and then suddenly became the center of her own universe with Zoe 101. It was a polished world built on high school fantasy. Malibu sunshine, beachside dorms, drama that ended before the next commercial. But that fantasy was built on the real-life pressure of working 12-hour days, hitting marks, memorizing scripts, and smiling on cue. That is a lot to ask from a child. When she left, she did not just walk off a set. She walked into one of the most emotionally raw periods of her life, with cameras still watching. Becoming a mother at 16 is hard. Becoming one while the world calls you irresponsible, a cautionary tale, a disappointment, that is something else entirely. She moved back to Louisiana, away from the spotlight. She focused on her child, and she was quiet. No grand statements, no televised comeback, no tell-all interviews. Just silence, a silence that was both protective and painful. It would be years before Jaime Lynn returned to the public eye, and even then, it was not to reclaim her child star past. She tried her hand at country music, released an EP, and slowly rebuilt her life on her own terms. But for many, the image of her as the girl who ruined a hit show still lingered. The truth is, Jaime Lynn did not ruin anything. She grew up. She made a decision, a difficult one. And the industry she had once carried on her shoulders made it clear she was no longer welcome the moment she stopped fitting their idea of what a teen star should be. Her story is not a fall from grace. It is the story of someone who had to become an adult before she even finished being a kid. That kind of pressure does not leave scars. It leaves silence. And in that silence, she found something no one expected: a life beyond the screen. Michael Oliver was the kind of kid who could turn chaos into comedy. As Junior in Problem Child, he was everything the title promised: wild, loud, hilarious, and just a little dangerous. He was not your typical sweet-faced Hollywood kid. He was a troublemaker you could not help but love. And then, like the perfect punchline to a joke we did not see coming, he was gone. His exit was sudden, but the signs were always there. The Problem Child films made money, but they also made problems: legal disputes, managerial chaos, allegations of financial exploitation. Behind the scenes, Michael's world was unraveling before it even had a chance to begin. By the time he was a teenager, the industry had already burned him out. He did not just step away, he stepped back into anonymity. And he has rarely looked back. Today, Michael lives far from Hollywood's orbit. He is not trying to reclaim fame. He is not on reality shows or writing tell-all books. He is just living, quietly, on his terms. And that silence says more than any interview could. It says he chose peace over applause, privacy over profit. That may be the only happy ending left for a child actor, is to become someone the world forgets. It is easy to think of these stars as lost, but maybe they are not lost at all. Maybe they just escaped. And in Michael's case, maybe disappearing was the bravest thing he ever did. The Secret World of Alex Mack felt like someone handed you a diary filled with electric secrets and said, "This is what growing up really feels like." Not just the awkward parts or the funny bits, but the transformation, the fear, the pressure to hide who you are just to survive middle school. Alex Mack was just a normal girl until one accident gave her superpowers: telekinesis, shape-shifting, even turning into a silver puddle. But here is the thing. It was never really about the powers. It was about what you do when you are different and scared and trying to stay invisible. It was about lying to your best friend because the truth might ruin everything. About hiding from the people who say they want to help but only want to control you. About looking in the mirror and not knowing what version of yourself is going to show up that day. It captured all the weirdness of adolescence and wrapped it in science fiction that felt just close enough to possible. The show had a grit to it. Not dark, but raw. It did not sugarcoat the fear of getting caught or the anxiety of not being normal. And yet, it still found space for humor, for friendship, for those little wins that make being a teenager bearable. Alex was smart, brave, messy, and real. Her world was complicated. Her choices were heavy. And you watched because somewhere deep down, you wondered what secrets might be hiding in your own world too. What if something in you was strange, or powerful, or both? The Secret World of Alex Mack was not a fantasy. It was a mirror. And sometimes it showed us more than we were ready to see. There's a good chance you do not remember his name, but you definitely remember his face. Wide glasses, fur-lined coat, and that desperate, pleading line, "You'll shoot your eye out." Peter Billingsley was Ralphie, the Ralphie. And A Christmas Story was not just a movie, it was a ritual. It was Christmas morning in a snow-drenched living room with a plate of cookies and that one kid who just wanted a Red Ryder BB gun more than life itself. The strange thing is that one film should have made him a household name forever. And in some ways, it did. You see his face on t-shirts, ornaments, memes, even wrapping paper. But the person? The actor behind the glasses? He vanished. Quietly. Cleanly. Like snow melting the day after Christmas. Peter did a few more acting gigs after that, guest spots on television, a few commercials, but it was never the same. The problem with being part of a classic is that you stop being you. You become the character. And Ralphie, lovable as he was, cast a long shadow. So Peter pivoted. Instead of chasing the spotlight, he stepped behind it. He got into production. Worked closely with Jon Favreau. Had a hand in films like Iron Man and Elf. In fact, that dry, deadpan tone in Elf That is him. He even directed a couple of projects, quietly built a whole second act in Hollywood without ever needing to put the glasses back on. But fans never really caught up with that. To most of the world, he stayed frozen in that one Christmas, one role, one moment. And that is what makes his story so unique. He did not fall. He did not fail. He just changed. Quietly. Purposefully. While the rest of us kept watching A Christmas Story every December, he moved on. You have to wonder how that feels, to be everyone's childhood memory, but no one's current conversation. Peter Billingsley never really left Hollywood, but for the people who grew up with him, it feels like he disappeared. Taran Noah Smith was the youngest of the Taylor boys on Home Improvement. He was the wide-eyed, goofy one, always asking weird questions, always getting in trouble, but in the best possible way. He was not just a background character, he had a presence, a kind of innocent honesty that made him feel like everyone's little brother. But once the series wrapped, Taran vanished. Not a pause, not a break, a full stop. What made his disappearance stand out was how intentional it seemed. He was just 16 when Home Improvement ended, and he made it very clear he was done. He wanted nothing to do with Hollywood. No spin-offs, no sequels. He did not even want to act again. Instead, Taran went in a completely different direction. He started a vegan food business, bought a house, tried to live quietly. But the press kept coming. People were obsessed with his choices. He had gotten married to someone 16 years older than him. He was investing in offbeat business ideas. And all the while, he was still just a teenager trying to figure it all out. There were legal battles with his parents over money he earned as a child actor. There were stories about him rejecting the Hollywood lifestyle. But Taran kept doing things his way, even when it did not make sense to the people watching from the outside. Today, he lives almost entirely off the grid. Occasionally, he pops up in an interview or news piece. But he is not chasing the spotlight. He is not nostalgic about the show. He does not miss the fame. And maybe that is what makes his story so rare. He walked away before the machine could chew him up. Before the headlines, before the downfall, he disappeared while things were still good, on his terms. When you rewatch Home Improvement, it is hard not to smile when you see him. That kid, so full of life and timing. And then you wonder what it must feel like to have had that much attention, and to choose a life where no one knows your name. Tina Yothers came into Family Ties like a spark, full of energy, with that signature blonde hair and no-nonsense attitude. As Jennifer Keaton, she was the youngest of the siblings, a grounded, tomboyish contrast to the idealistic parents and her wildly ambitious brother Alex. And for millions of viewers, she was just as important to the show's chemistry as any of them. She held her own next to giants, and she did it with a kind of quiet confidence that made her instantly lovable. But like so many child stars, Tina's story is not about what happened while the cameras were rolling. It is about what happened when they stopped. Tina was only 9 years old when Family Ties started airing. By the time it ended in 1989, she had spent more than half her life in that role. Most kids graduate middle school and high school with memories of classrooms and friends. Tina graduated with scripts, call times, and studio applause. Her identity was built inside a television set. And when the set came down, so did the sense of who she was supposed to be. Tina tried to continue acting after the show ended, but the roles weren't coming. She was not the precocious little sister anymore. She was a teenager, then a young adult, someone Hollywood did not know what to do with. There was no scandal, no headline-making crash, just a quiet withdrawal from the spotlight, one that almost felt planned. But it wasn't. She struggled with the same thing so many child actors face: invisibility. People knew her face, but not her voice. They remembered Jennifer, not Tina. And when you have spent your formative years being told who to be, figuring that out on your own feels like walking without a map. She turned to music for a while, starting a band and experimenting with a punk rock image that seemed to shout, "This is who I am now." It was bold, it was different, and it was maybe a little desperate. Not for attention, but for identity. Later in life, Tina appeared on a few reality shows, Celebrity Fit Club, What Not to Wear, things like that. And with each appearance, she was met with the same reaction: surprise. Surprised that she looked different. Surprised that she had stepped away. Surprised that time had passed, as if people expected her to still be 11 years old, cracking jokes in the Keaton living room. That is the strange curse of growing up on television. You grow up, but the world keeps watching reruns. Tina has spoken openly about her choice to leave Hollywood behind, about wanting to raise a family, live a private life, and be known for something other than who she was as a child. And she has done just that, a quiet life on her own terms. Her story is not tragic, but it is telling. It reminds us that sometimes the hardest thing about fame is knowing when to walk away and who you are when you do. Because even the most memorable characters eventually leave the screen, and what is left behind is not always applause. Sometimes it is just silence, and the person learning how to live in it. Taran Noah Smith was the youngest son in Home Improvement, the awkward, often forgotten middle child of the Taylor family. He grew up on screen, his voice deepening as the seasons passed, his expressions maturing as America watched from their living rooms. But behind the jokes and tool puns was a boy who never asked for any of it. Fame was something that happened to him, never something he chased. When the show ended, Taran was just 17 years old. He did not celebrate his Hollywood success. He walked away from it, completely. He distanced himself from the industry, from the money, from the spotlight. Instead, he turned towards something far more grounded: veganism, sustainable living, building homes with alternative materials, and running a food company that served organic meals to schools. While others searched for ways back into television, Taran planted his feet firmly in the soil, literally. His story is not flashy, it is not headline-grabbing, but it is powerful. He has spoken about how alienating childhood fame can be, how it distorts your sense of self, your future, your place in the world. Taran did not want to be remembered for punchlines or reruns. He wanted to build something real. And while the world may have forgotten his name, it is clear he never forgot who he was. There is something beautiful about a child star who grows up and becomes exactly who they needed when they were young. Taran Noah Smith disappeared from our screens, but maybe that is because he found a better way to show up in the world. Beetlejuice. The cartoon was like stepping into your weirdest dream and finding out someone had already drawn it, colored it in slime green, and made it funnier than you expected. It should not have worked. A creepy ghost from a dark comedy movie turned into a kids' show? That sounds like a bad idea on paper. But somehow, Beetlejuice the animated series was its own strange miracle. The show dialed back the horror and turned up the weird, way up. This Beetlejuice was more mischief than menace, more chaos than cruelty. He was loud, gross, brilliant, and totally impossible to predict. And he was best friends with Lydia, yes, the goth teenager from the movie, but in this version, she was his partner in crime, not his target. Together, they traveled between the real world and the neither world, where nothing made sense and everything had eyeballs. The art style was twisted but oddly beautiful. Everything looked like it came from a haunted toy box. And the jokes? They were non-stop. Beetlejuice cracked puns so fast you had to replay the episode just to catch half of them. But for all the goofiness, the heart of the show was Lydia. She was smart, confident, and unapologetically herself. And Beetlejuice, for all his flaws, always had her back. Their friendship was weird, but it worked, and it told kids something valuable. It is okay to be different. It is okay to be strange. In fact, it might just be your greatest strength. For a while, Andrew Lawrence was just about everywhere. If you had a television in the late 1990s, there was no avoiding him. He starred alongside his real-life brothers, Joey and Matthew, in Brotherly Love, a show that somehow made sibling chaos feel charming. Andrew was the youngest, but often the funniest. He had the floppy hair, the sharp timing, and that kind of effortless presence you just could not teach. And then one day, it was over. He faded out of teen television without headlines, without drama, without a word. What made his story feel so strange was that he was part of a family built for the spotlight. The Lawrence brothers were a package deal. From Boy Meets World to Disney Channel movies, they were Hollywood's golden boys for a minute. And Andrew? He had serious momentum, guest spots, voice work, leading roles in teen films. You would think the next step was obvious. But instead of blowing up, he backed away. He still worked here and there, some voice roles, some indie stuff, but it was never in the public eye the way it had been. There were no red carpets, no major campaigns. The name Andrew Lawrence slowly stopped popping up in credits, and yet there was never a scandal. Never a big moment of fallout. He just moved on, started working behind the camera, focused on music, stayed close to his brothers, but kept a smaller circle. For fans who remembered him as a mainstay of the late 90s Disney lineup, the silence was jarring. You would scroll through reruns and wonder, wait, what happened to him? And there was no real answer. That is the thing about fame when you are young. Sometimes it does not come crashing down, it just slips quietly out the door. And with Andrew Lawrence, it felt like one moment he was everywhere, and the next, he was someone you only remembered in flashes. No goodbye, no finale, just gone. Which of these forgotten faces lit up your screen growing up? Drop their name in the comments, tap like if one stirred a memory you did not expect, and subscribe so you never miss the stories of the stars who shaped your childhood.